Hello everybody, welcome to Wonky Ankle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today is a Patreon request from Mitchell. I'm not even going to try and pronounce your last name. Long overdue request for Feed Me Calamari Tuesday. I'm not sure if this is a good or bad time to actually be covering this one, since I'm aware Feed Me has a new album called High Street Creeps coming out in less than a week. I might end up reviewing that one too, but we'll see how things go. I don't know. But the request was for this album, Calamari Tuesday, so I'm covering that. So this guy, John Gooch, UK producer, used to be on the Mousetrap label. Hell, I'm pretty sure he still has some releases on there every now and then, but this particular one was self-released on his own label, Sotto Voce. This came out in 2013, and that was my senior year in high school. That was the period where I was most into Pretty Lights, and I think that was the time where I was at my peak of enjoyment of Skrillex and his ilk. His Recess album and Knife Party's Abandoned Ship were just around the corner, and the year before we got Zed's Clarity as well. 2013 was the peak time for me to enjoy an album like this. Mostly centered around that electro house and modern dubstep style that I was just discovering at the time. A lot like those other albums I've mentioned above. One little problem though. At that time, I had never even heard of Feed Me. Or maybe I'd possibly heard of him, but I only listened to this album, Calamari Tuesday, for the first time just in this past month. And this is a problem because that means there's zero nostalgia factor for me here. I mean, I love Zed's Clarity and Knife Party's Abandoned Ship now because they've had so much time to sink into my life and develop nostalgia for me. The former mainly because of pushing for my brother, but you know. If I'd heard Calamari Tuesday back when it actually came out, I have a feeling I would have absolutely loved it. That was the perfect time for me to enjoy something like this. Right now, I've heard it about 7 times, and I think it's good but not great. Bit of a mixed bag sometimes, and there's not any novelty of me first discovering the sound and really getting into it anymore. I have an outsider perspective, and I really wish I hadn't. I feel like I'm way too freaking late to the boat on this guy. But never mind, I may as well discuss the album from the perspective that I do have. So yeah, I think this album is good, but I don't think it's quite great. I think its first half is noticeably stronger than its second half, and I do get the urge to edit it down a bit. But I also don't think there's anything outright bad on this album either. I mean, this genre now has the potential to deliver stuff that I really hate. So I think it's telling that even in its worst moments, Calamari Tuesday is still perfectly listenable. I mean, just from the first track, Orion, it feels like this album is really setting out to be something big and epic and be this amazing musical experience with all these orchestral elements involved. The whole thing is really fun and attention-grabbing and changes and evolves a little bit over the course of its time. Now, admittedly, it wasn't as engrossing for me on a bunch of these listens as I'd like. As someone who sat through every Savant album a while ago and really regrets it, this didn't immediately impress me just from a conceptual level, but I will say it does a really good job of opening this album up, and that quality is kept up on Death by Robot, which was pretty consistently my favorite track from this thing overall. At first I was like, this is a totally ridiculous concept, a lot of vocoder vocals, talking about preparing for the invasion of the killer robots and defending the planet with our lives. But it totally owns its cheesiness and runs with it. It's just really fun to listen to, and it's really catchy too. Sounds again like something you'd hear on a Savant album. I really ended up wholeheartedly loving this thing. And Lonely Mountain flows out of it super well, just a lot of fun electro house stuff with fun jumpy melodies and banging beats. 3 tracks in, I've got really hooked on this. Ebb and Flow, meanwhile, I was warned by the requester that the drop on this one kinda sucked, and yeah, it was not great. It kinda has this screeching synth and reminds me a lot of the drop on Scary Monsters and Ice Sprites. That is some definite modern dubstep there for you. But I don't know, this track got better and better every time I heard it. The drop was grating at first, but now I think I like it even more than the actual Scary Monsters and Ice Sprites drop. And the vocal presence of Tasha Baxter was a nice breath of fresh air too. Just overall, surprisingly ended up enjoying it. Though then you got Rat Trap. I wasn't as pulled in by that one. It was like trying to live up to the second word in that title and deliver a 2013 style of EDM trap that, not usually my thing. But it still wasn't awful by any stretch. It still had a pretty good melody on top of everything. Doot, 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 doot. It was good for a bit of variety too. I just thought it was kind of dull all by itself. You also got Dazed, a pretty decent slice of progressive house that changes around a bit too. This one was alright, though I should mention that most of my listens to this thing were of a continuous mix, which I'm 90% sure was unofficial. I mean, the mix was mostly pretty solid and really helped all the previous tracks work well with each other, but this particular transition between Rat Trap and Dazed was completely flubbed. The downbeat was in the right place, but they're two really different tempos, and whoever mixed those tracks didn't even try to do any time correction to make it flow better. And you got these two sections playing on top of each other that don't match up at all, and that pretty consistently pissed me off, unfortunately. Again, I'm pretty sure the mix is unofficial. There's no mix on Spotify, for instance. So this criticism may not apply if I'm right that Gooch himself didn't put the mix together, but I couldn't go without bringing it up. That transition alone put a big damper on my enjoyment of Dazed on most listens of this thing. I suppose it didn't exactly help that Dazed was not exactly the most interesting track to talk about in the first place, but it is a good track though. And after that, you get another vocal track with Ophelia featuring Yachty, easily one of the catchiest tracks in the bunch. Love, don't let me down. Got a bit of a reggae flavor to it, as we always gotta have at least one track that puts the dub back in dubstep. Pretty enjoyable stuff here too. Unfortunately, after this is the point at which this album kinda starts losing steam for me. Chinchilla is one of those tracks that I was told to like. Apparently a big highlight for most people, and I thought it was good too, but most of the time it just made me want to listen to Zed's Shave It Up instead. There were like some little build-up sections where I was almost led into humming the melody of that track. I know they're not that similar, and Chinchilla has some little melodies that are good enough on their own, but I don't know, it kind of got diminishing returns with repeat listens. And right after that, you got In the Bin, which was really dull and never left any impression on me at all, aside from a vocal hook from someone who isn't credited, so I assume is handled by John Gooch himself? I don't know, but it just completely fell flat for me, and you could have easily cut this one out without negatively affecting the album. It picks up a little bit more with Fiasco and Love Is All I Got. The former is like a better and livelier version of Chinchilla with some cool piano breakdowns that I enjoyed. And the latter is a slightly awkward but still pretty charming vocal track featuring the band Crystal Fighters. Another really catchy track that's stuck in the head super easily. Gives all love in the morning, gives all love in the evening, 'cause love is all I got. But then you got Short Skirt, No Grip, and Onstuh all right in a row, and I'm not convinced you needed all three of these on the album. None of them are bad, but they're all really similar and kind of have the same function in the album. Most like electro house tracks with a slight funk edge, like Chinchilla and Fiasco. Especially having all of them in a row prevented them from being as impactful as they could have been. Of the three, Onstuh was probably the best, being the liveliest and most energetic, and Short Skirt was probably the catchiest, but No Grip wasn't really necessary to keep. Fine out of context, but there's other tracks on this album that just sound just like it and do it better. And even in the other two, it still wouldn't have hurt to space them out a little better, I don't know. But finally, the album ends with Last Requests, which is thankfully a really solid way to go out. Has easily the best vocal performance in the bunch from Jenna G, and ends with a little orchestral section to bookend things and bring it all full circle, I guess. So yeah, that's very nice. So that's everything on Calamari Tuesday. Overall, I think this album's really solid. Brought back some good memories from my later high school years. Like I said at the beginning, I get the feeling that if I had picked this album up back when it came out, I'd likely look back on it now way more fondly. Just hearing it for the first time in 2019, it's not gonna have the same kind of personal meaning as it would have otherwise. And besides that, I definitely would like this album more if you trimmed some of the fat, took out a bunch of redundant tracks or maybe moved some around. I don't know, but hey, it's not as in dire need of fat trimming as your typical Savant album. I know I've been shitting on Savant a lot, but he can do this exact kind of stuff really well too, so don't take those jabs too seriously. As it is though, Calamari Tuesday is a very good album that doesn't quite reach greatness for me, but I can easily see reaching that point for other people who are still into this style as much as I used to be around the time this came out. If you're not already into this kind of modern dubstep and electro house popularized by the Skrillexes and Knife Parties of the world, I don't know if Feed Me is really going to change your mind. But I like those styles, so I like this album. And if you also like those styles, you should pick this thing up if you haven't already. So yeah, this was pretty solid. I'm overall feeling a 7.7 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. There are some people you want to add yourself to the list or make me a review something. Link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.